Hi, I'm Peter Carlos, and this is my first podcast. I'm doing a podcast because I run an acting school called the Melbourne Actors Lab, and I give long speeches during class about everything to do with acting. So everyone's like, why don't you do a podcast? Why don't you do a podcast? And here we are, right? We're watering it down to a name. We've got to call it something. So I've come up with the Actors Muscle for now, because it really is about us developing acting muscle and getting out there and getting work. I need to thank Alec and the Alex Theatre and his team, Simon and Tim here, developing me out to do this. We hope to have many more guests, so it won't just be me here sitting here talking about acting and stuff, because that could get quite boring. But eventually we'll have people talk about films, acting styles, what's going on, and so forth. I'm wearing this T-shirt on purpose. It's a T-shirt I bought up in the early 90s from LA. I studied at the Strasberg Institute in LA. And it's one of the teachers that influenced my life. Lee Strasberg, he was dead when I got there, but there was amazing teachers there. Stella Adler was another one. And those are the two big teachers that we know in today's world. There's many others. But I want to talk about the history of acting teachers and how we came to be where we are today. Keep in mind, knowing that information intellectually doesn't necessarily make you a better actor, because most actors know information intellectually. It means nothing if you don't have it in the body. That's a big thing about acting. No good up here, got to be in the body. A lot of this information came from books. Stella's books, Lee's books, Stanislavski's books. They're all out there. Go grab them, read them, get to know them, practice them. There's another great book called The Great Acting Teacher by a guy named Richard Bressov. I will be reading from my notes. I don't want to sit there reading, but they're here. And I'll show you some photos of these people. It's not very high-tech. I've just printed out some photos so you can see them. You can find them all online and do some research of your own. Now, I just had a vision once about how this whole drama thing came about. And we can all imagine that there's a couple of cavemen in a cave somewhere, and one of them goes out. We'll call him Og for now. Og goes to the right and encounters a dinosaur, and we'll call the other one Ugg. He goes to the left, finds a bunch of berries, and they both come back to the cave, and they share their stories. Og says, I found a big dinosaur, and people go, wow, that's very exciting, and they get caught up in it. And Og says, I found a bunch of berries, and people go, not as exciting as a dinosaur. And that became the early stages, or would have become the early stages of storytelling, which is the glue of our society. You know what I'm saying? That's what Stella used to call it, the fabric of our society. And even though we have some kind of trace of this, from cave paintings and stuff, someone would have told these people what to paint. And one can also assume that at one stage, as recently they found a young cave boy that was eaten by one of these bird dinosaurs. They did all this testing and they found out that that's how the kid died. One day, Og went to the right, didn't come back. Og went to the left, didn't come back because he ate a poison berry. So at that stage, something like that would have been the beginning of fiction. Someone would have had to make up what happened to Og and talk about it. These could be the early stages of us as a species sharing and telling stories. You know what I'm saying? From there, we have very, very little traces or recorded history. There's many out there, but these are the basic ones. These are the ones we know. The biggest one that we know, everyone calls actors Thespians. There was a guy named Thespian. This is him right here. There's a beautiful photograph of him, right? That's Thespis. And he was, in the early days, the Greeks believed that they used to wear the skin, the fur of a male goat, which in Greek the word is trago, and the ram. They used to wear that, and they used to believe that actors were respected. They were heightened beings at the time. You know what I'm saying? Which we've come a long way since then. We're not as respected unless you make it to the Academy Awards, then you're very well respected. But actors back then thought that they were kind of connecting with higher powers. So they used to wear this trago, this outfit, and that's where the word tragudi came from. Greek means song, and tragedy came from that. And there is a company in New York, and I believe it's run by Harvey Keitel, called the Goat Slingers, and that's where he got it from, because he must have heard from that. So there is that myth that actors were that. And around that time, there's a guy named Thespis who believed, and he struggled with the idea of presentation versus representation, meaning, do I see someone do something and I mimic it, or do I actually feel it? Very early on, we have those battles, that discussion coming up. What's better to do? Also, the ancient Greeks back then they struck poses, but the poses were based because they believed that our emotions came from chemicals. And we still have these terms today. You're feeling dark, you're feeling blue. They believe that certain things like phlegm was blue or black, so it made you feel black or blue. Love was red and pink, and we still have that today. And he came up with certain poses in his mind, or their mind back then. If you strike those poses, those chemicals came out and gave you those emotions and those feelings, right? That was back then, and they used to use masks, which we have the mask of the theater, laughing, smiling, all that stuff. Long, long time ago. After that, we're talking about a good couple hundred years after that, was a guy named Quintin, a Roman guy. This is him. That's what he looked like. They have that on a cave painting somewhere or painting somewhere. Now, he started to take those and make him do them in front of a mirror. So people would sit in front of a mirror, strike a pose, and show anger and love and all these kinds of things. And that was quite a long time ago, and we still use that today. I know a lot of actors that still use poses today in front of a mirror. So nothing's much has changed as far as that ingredient goes. You know what I'm saying? They did that for a long time ago, right? And that kind of thinking lasted for about 1,800 years. Nothing that we know or has been recorded that were found. So it's been like that for a long time. After that, there's a guy at the beginning of the 17th century named Aaron Hill, and here's a quick photo of him. That's Aaron Hill, quite a lovely looking creature there with the wig on and everything. The thing with Aaron Hill was that he still used mirrors and he still had the poses, right? But he narrowed it down to 10 poses. There was, by the way, he was buried at Westminster Abbey, so this is what you got to do to get buried there. You can strike a bunch of poses. They were, I have them down here, they were joy, grief, anger, pity, scorn, hatred, jealousy, wonder, fear, and love. And a lot of the actors would study these gestures from their teachers, and then they would become teachers in turn, but they were the accepted 10 gestures as actors. And that went on for a long time, so you'd get on stage and you'd show anger like this or whatever it was, and love, whatever that was. I think there's a chart out there somewhere showing all these poses, right? It'd be interesting to take them, strike a pose, so to speak. That went on for quite a while, all right? But he did also add one thing. It wasn't just the poses. Like Thespian said, he also said, and here it is, it's a quote from him, if you forget the audience, you will charm them. Forget that you're acting. He was one of the first people that said, forget the audience. Ignore the audience. That's a big statement. That's a big shift after 1,800 years of posing to have someone say, the audience isn't there. Just be you. Relax, be you. Big one. Hill. Not many people know about this guy Hill, right? So there he was. After that, not immediately after that, there's a guy named Delzard, French guy, and he looks, wow, look at this guy. Just brilliant. Right? I wouldn't take him for an acting teacher if I went into a class and this guy told me, like, oh boy, I'm in trouble here, right? Love the jacket, love the suit, all that kind of stuff. But he was I'm making a lot of bumpy sounds here, but that's okay. He studied at the Royal Dramatic School of Paris. It's got a very, very formal name. They also taught him gestures. And his biggest dilemma was that these gestures didn't match what he saw every day in life. And observing everyday life is a big deal for an actor. I know so many actors that used to. I remember Shelley Winters, who used to talk at the actor studio. She talked about once how she got on a train to observe people in New York going to work, and the same group of people, she would find them coming home from work, just to watch the difference. Many teachers used to take you to restaurants and sit outside the restaurant, watch people going in, watch people coming out, because you go into a restaurant different, you're hungry, your stomach's empty, you come out differently. Do you know what I'm saying? So these observations in life, right, we tried to bring them on stage. And that guy, Delzard, was the first one to start doing that. You know what I'm saying? Trying to apply that, okay? But he also said that emotions alone will carry you a short way. It's the inner inspiration that feeds all this. So he was very aware that if I act angry and I don't have anything on the inside, that I can only act angry for so long. Because what happens is after a while, you're in an imaginary world and your brain goes, I'm not really angry. I'm not really in love with the banana next to me. I'm not really happy or sad or whatever. So there's no connection to the inside, and you kind of start to lose believability in that. So it's this guy here, Francois Delzard, and I'm sure there's a wonderful French way to present it. My darling wife talks French, she would say it differently, right? But he was the first one to start connecting the external to the internal, okay? And sometimes he did say that if you just act it out, it will create the emotion. He was also the first one to mention a key word in our work called relaxation, right? I tell students this: relaxation is our number one enemy. I'll give you an example. When you're in the supermarket buying bread, you just go there, you buy the bread, you're not even thinking about it. If I told everyone in the supermarket to stop and watch you buy bread, you'd get nervous. You'd become aware of yourself. You wouldn't buy the shitty cheap bread that you buy because you think you're being judged. And tension kills us. Lee Strasberg talks about tension. He used to say, if I had you pick up a piano, you wouldn't be able to do a math problem because of all the tension. Most actors couldn't do the math problem anyway, but that's a different story. But the point being, tension is a killer, right? So this guy here, back in the early 1800s, whatever it was the first one to mention relaxation. And he came up with an exercise called decomposing exercises, where you'd feel your body decomposing, and you'd relax, letting out tension. He also said, this is the first time we hear from him, but he said he still used mirrors, he still used gestures, right? But his trinity was life, mind, and soul. He said actors communicate with voice, gesture, and words. So he was onto something as far as connecting the inside with the outside. Unfortunately, the guy died in March of 1870, and he didn't put all his ideas on paper. So a lot of that was lost. You know what I'm saying? Didn't publish them. We're not quite sure where he was going. But he did leave the idea, the scope of relaxation, connecting the outside with the inside. Even though he had both of them, he still hung onto gestures, and he did talk about hands and feet to show gestures. I'll give you some examples that he talked about, like if your legs were together, very military, it was very disciplined, all right? If your fingers were outwards wide, it was passionate. Do you know what I'm saying? He had a more detailed list, and it just shows hands and gestures, love, passion, all that kind of stuff. Legs spread open, legs closed together. So it was very external like that. Then there was a guy named McKay who was a student of Delzard, and he traveled to the U.S. This guy, I don't have a photo of him, didn't actually come up with anything, just took his ideas to the U.S. And the problem is that a lot of his ideas got watered down by bad teaching. People just kind of showed things and actors copied, but they weren't sure what was going on. But it did become quite the fashionable thing. There was clothes, they had cosmetics, clothing, corsets, all this kind of stuff, because it was the new fashionable way to teach, you know what I'm saying, or to act, right? So that came down, but over time, it became, I guess, the equivalent of fast food. You know what I'm saying? Everyone was doing it, badly managed, it was available everywhere, but it started to be also connected with bad acting. So that kind of died out when it first hit America. It didn't go anywhere after that, right? That went out, and the sad thing is that it's what the poor guy was trying to fight. Here he was trying to fight this thing of bad acting, but his work ended up being fast food franchise, bubblegum stuff. You know what I'm saying? Didn't go down well, right? Now, after that came the big thing. This was around the end of the 19th century. Most were still kind of caught up in this acting in front of a mirror, outward stuff, posing, you know what I'm saying? You had to talk loudly to be heard. You had to face the audience, all right? And it was still important not to connect inside. It was seen as taboo. It was seen as damaging. Do you know what I'm saying, right? Until what in our world is called the Russian Revolution, right? There was a guy named Stanislavski, which we all know, and he was the big one as far as acting teachers go. That's him, right? Stanislavski, he wanted to be a singer in the early days, wasn't very successful. He had a big house at one stage because what happened is his father gave him a part of the house and he opened like a puppet theater. So he would do all that stuff, but his heart lay in acting. And the father helped him transform this little part of the house into a theater, and that's where he would explore a lot of his choices, right? Now, when he was there, he really, really wanted to be good. He really wanted to put on stage what he saw outside. He'd see people, he'd see the world, how they behave, and he was hoping to bring that sense of realism on stage. That was Stanislavski's big thing, realism on stage, right? That was what he was fighting for. He did go to, I remember the name of the school that he went to, some formal name once again. I'll find it eventually, all right? What happened is that he also learned gestures. But here's the problem with gestures, especially if you've only got 10 to work with. Stanislavski felt, if I do this gesture for anger, or this gesture for happiness, I've lost my individuality. I don't get to put my self-expression into my work. I'm posing. It's what they call cookie cutter stuff. And sad but true, a lot of schools still teach that. It's what I call cookie cutter stuff. There's only one way to do it, you know what I'm saying? Where there's not. There's many, many, many different ways. This was his big thing. You know what I'm saying? It was all outward behavior. And he realized people spoke differently on the streets, all right? They were indicating they weren't actually feeling it. That was his big things. He tried things in front of the mirror, tried voices, tried different emotions, tried makeup, costumes, masks, different stances with the posture to find a certain character, hoping he triggered certain things, you know what I'm saying, to trigger all in. At one stage, they did a play, a French play. It was a farce. He was so bad and so nervous that he actually changed his name. His real name isn't Stanislavski. He was born Konstantin Alexeyev, and he changed it to Konstantin Stanislavski. The reason being he didn't want to be associated with that bad performance that he did. So if everyone said, oh, that's Alexeyev guy was horrible, he'd say, well, I'm Stanislavski, it's not me, someone else. You know what I'm saying? There was no internet back in those days, so you could kind of lie around these things. After all that, he took time off, and then he went, studied operas, studied ballet. He still felt false, and that's what he went to. That's what it's called, the Imperial Dramatic School of Moscow. I mean, what a name. That's very imperial, right? That's where he went, and he started to study gesturing again. Absolutely hated it. Once again, he felt like he was deprived of his own imagination and his own voice as an actor, which is still a big deal as an actor. I tell everyone I come across with as an actor, you're fighting for your creative control over your work. Actors don't seem to understand that. It's not I turn up and the director tells me what to do. I turn up, I do my work. The director does lenses, whatever they like, that's their job. There is a cooperation, a creative mixture of ideas, but at the end of the day, it's your work. And if you hire good actors, they know what to do. If you hire people that don't know what to do, then you as a director are forced to tell them what to do. And this a horrible way to work, right? It started back then with a guy named Stanislavski, trying to find his voice into it. So after that dismal play that he did and was forced to change his name, took a long time off. And the big discovery was, how do you get your ideas in the actor's voice? That should be a good name for a podcast, the actor's voice. There you go. It's probably already done. You know, his master's voice. There we go. Change that. But now, after he left that school, he had his little theater too. And he said, this is what he said, he had found terms at that stage. We know these terms, but they came from his time period. There are no small actors. There's no small parts. There's only small actors. If you're playing old, look for the young. If you're playing evil, look for the good in the character. These catchy phrases, and a lot of acting teachers throw them around now, and the student goes, oh my God, that's very interesting, and they write them down. Great. Pointless. All right. Kazan once said, a dying man is trying to show you that he's alive. So you're playing the opposite. That concept came about around Stanislavski's time. It is nothing new. Maybe you're hearing about it, but we've got to give, credit where credit's due, and that's what he was known for, right? He started to take this away, and then what he did is he met a guy named Vladimir Nemirovich Dachenko. Dachenko, right, sat there. He was a playwright, and he sat there with Stanislavski. They had coffee, and they spoke about what was wrong with the theater in Moscow at the time. They felt like rehearsals were too short. They felt like plays were underdeveloped. They felt like there wasn't much realism on stage. And these guys set about, and they discovered, or they're not discovered, they came up with the Moscow Art Theater, short known as MAT, M-A-T. They got together. They had a group of people, the repertoire, you know what I'm saying? They got together. They rehearsed longer. They took time to get into character. And they put on their first production. And it was off video, right? And what happened is that it blew people away. It opened in October 1898. And it absolutely took people by storm. Sets were real. There was a lot of realism, detail on stage. The mannerisms were real. It was just like life. They weren't acting, and they weren't doing it for the audience. They built a fourth wall. It was private. It was intimate. And people, as far as we know anyway, I'm sure there could have been someone doing it across the world somewhere, but we don't have much recorded history of that. People were blown away by this. They did their first play, and they did very well. And then after that, at some stage, they did a few more plays, but they didn't go as well. And Stanislavski started to think, why is it when we do it for the first time, it's amazing, and then when we repeat it, we kind of lose the freshness. We start to mimic again. We go back into gesturing. And then that set him into a whole other cycle again of finding out why. Why can some actors do one role for many, many months and still find it fresh and some can't? Was it by instinct? What did they know that the others didn't? And he tried to come up with a formula for that. Right? At some stage, they met a guy named Anton Chekhov, which I'm sure we've all heard of. He's a wonderful playwright. He gave them the rights to the Seagull. Said, you guys do my first play here. And they did it. In 6 years, they did 20 plays. They literally changed the way theater was shown in Moscow at the time. Right? Whole new level of reality on stage. And then, once again, in 1906, he took time off. Even though the shows were doing quite well, he felt like he had lost something. He felt like there was no connection again, because as the plays were repeated, they were getting staler and staler and staler. And this was his inner turmoil. After that, he was haunted by all this, and then he thought, I'm going to take some time off. And he came up. He went around. He spent 3 more years, by the way, exploring all this stuff. And here we are at the start of the century. And we'll go back in time, we've got Quintin, we have Thespian, all doing it in front of a mirror. We have Delzard, which began to bring in the notion of relaxation. We have Hill, who said, forget the audience. And now we have Stanislavski, who's looking for truth. He came up with what he called the system, which involved relaxation. It involved getting rid of the audience. It involved bringing reality onto stage. He focused on relaxation, concentration, the circumstances, and the action, which we'll talk about now. Other aspects of Stanislavski work, one of the things he called the circle of attention. If my aim right now is to go outside, I would have to take these off first. I would have to move my chair back. So my long-term intention is to get out the front door. But my immediate attention is changed all the time. I got to move my chair. I got to get up. I got to go around here. I got to open the door and then head out. So that's what he called the circle of intentions. My intention is to get outside, but my attention focuses to little details at any given moment. You can't change those things. You can't bulldoze. I can't just appear on the front door. I got to go through this whole system, right? The other thing he focused on is called public solitude. How to be private in a public place. That's a very, very, very big deal. There's an exercise Lee Strasberg does. It's called Private Moment. And it's about being private on stage. Not easy to do. Not easy to do. People are private. And you catch them. I'll give you an example. You're at home alone. You hear the front door open. Automatically you change. Automatically. Something changes in you. You've lost that sense of privacy. To have that on film is not easy. To have it on film with 50 people staring at you is not easy. It's actually a craft. And especially, that's why a lot of, let's call them method actors, for lack of a better term, get a lot of, bad rep, because we're trying to be private. If I'm social with him and I chit-chat and I get online, I lose that sense of privacy. A very good teacher of mine once said, imagine you're an aeroplane and you're trying to fly. And someone talks to you, you land again. Someone talks to you again, you land again. We're trying to fly up here. If you keep landing, you won't end up here. So it's a matter of, being able to communicate with people that say, excuse me, I got to put a mic here, hair and makeup and all that, and whatever's going on, but then be able to get back into it right away. That's a skill. It doesn't just happen. By the way, most things with acting, People think it just happens. It doesn't. It's a lot of work to sustain. There's a lot of focus and concentration. But Stanislavski was very aware of what he called public solitude. The other thing you want to talk about was sensory recall. Now, sensory recall means this. You have, and the body does this. They found out, for instance, like people remember the day JFK, got shot. In our world, people probably remember September 11th. Where were you? What was going on at the time? Your brain, like Og and Og, they went to see the dinosaur. Your brain takes a flash photograph, and it takes in all these senses, smell, sound, so that you don't do that again. You don't go down that tunnel if there's a boogeyman there. You know what I'm saying? You remember going down the tunnel. And all these things, like adrenaline, works like that. When adrenaline kicks in, the body knows, I've been down this tunnel before, there's a boogeyman at the end of it, and it starts to change the body physically. That's called sense memory, sense recall. So if you go back to something that happened that's heightened, and Stella Adler talks about things being heightened, we'll talk about it later, your body would remember a smell, a place, a sound, and they do this with their eyes closed because you're trying to create an imaginary world. We'll talk about all that separate, about the skill of doing that. But Stanislavski was aware of sensory recall. And if you create these things, it actually affects you. Not if you're looking for a result. I remember, I'll share a quick funny story with you guys. There's a girl in class one day, and she's doing a sensory exercise. And every time she'd come to the door, she was breaking up with her boyfriend. Every time she'd come to the door, she'd get tears in her eyes, but I could tell that they weren't emotions. And I'd say, what's going on here? She couldn't figure it out. She'd get back in there, she'd go to the front door, she'd touch the door, she'd remember turning up to this guy's house, and she's ready to have a big argument with him, and then she remembered she was allergic to cats. And he had cats in his house, and it was so strong that she'd start to get an allergic reaction. That's how powerful some of these things are. You all do a sensory memory in life without knowing it. You sit there, you daydream, you think of someone, and you get emotional. Or you see something on TV, something horrific, and it starts to affect you because you visualize you being in it. The body has the capacity to do that. So Stanislavski was very aware that that's one of his tools. Let's call them tools of the actor. The other one was imagination. And there's a big debate here between Lee Strasberg and Stella. Once again, when I get to those two, we'll talk about that. But he also was open to imagination, the what if factor. What if I was the one that was in that moment? You know what I'm saying? That's a big tool for the actor. But most of all, Stanislavski stayed away from imagination. He involved it, but he stayed closer to the truth of the situation, especially early on. When Lee Strasberg met him, that's where he was at. When Stella met him, he was closer to the imagination. That's why those two teachers are very different, right? The other thing he talked about was circumstances. This here is massive. And many, many, many actors and directors, this involves directors, don't understand this, right? He's where circumstances come into it. There's some nice ice there. Now, as I said earlier, I have to leave and get to the front door. If the circumstances were different, if there's a fire on, I'd throw the table out the way quickly. If I'm running late to go to work, different. The circumstances change my behavior. If something's going on downstairs, or if something urgent is happening, the circumstances of that action would be changed. The lines are exactly the same. We don't change the lines. We can't change the dialogue as actors. We can't change the direction of the film. But we can make adjustments to the circumstances. And many, 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 this is why I beg directors to understand acting, so you don't direct with the result in mind. I was reading how they took like 50 takes when they were doing Marriage Story, and 2 days to do one scene. And a director said, well, what a waste of time. I said, it's not a waste of time. It's different if you tell the director, today she lawyered up. Today she's got a date. The kids don't want to see you anymore. You've got no money in your pocket. So I can make adjustments, circumstances, to the scene that will feed the way something comes out. If I put a love letter in my pocket, if I put a gun in my pocket, or something that betrays me, I will act differently without thinking acting. It's the circumstances that change that result. And Stanislavski was one of the big people that included circumstances. How that changes your action. Once again, it's how the action is done. You can't change the action. I still got to get out of here. I've still got to fly on the plane. I'll give you an example. Star Wars, very, very basic film, right? I mean, not basic film. We all know it. That's what I mean by basic. We all get the picture. Good people, bad people, Death Star being built. Our job is to kill that. You know what I'm saying? So if I'm Luke Skywalker and I'm still flying my plane, right? But there's no emergency, I'll get on that plane casually. If the Death Star is about to be active, I'd get on it much quicker. I'd put my seatbelt on, be much more focused. Same action, but it comes across differently. That's where circumstances are a massive tool for actor. And Stanislavski was one of the first one to apply that. Meisner talks about it. I hear many people talking about Meisner. I go, well, Meisner came from somewhere. Stanislavski was the first one to introduce that element. That's why he's known as the godfather of method acting, if you want to call it that. But that's the point to him all. You know what I'm saying? Right? Then, after that, he put all these things together and he kept on teaching actors all that stuff, circumstances, effective memory, and so forth. There was a guy named Michael Chekhov who was Anton Chekhov's nephew. One was the playwright, one was the actor. By the way, this is Antov. This is one of my favorite photos of the guy. He's the playwright. Very charismatic, beautiful photograph, right? And this is the nephew. There's the nephew. Younger version. Now he, at the time he came about, you like our technical assistance here? There we go. It's a printout photograph. I'm sure later on we'll have people editing stuff together or something like that. But right now this works, all right? He felt like all this stuff that the uncle and his buddy were doing was kind of outdating. All this realism, all this life on stage. For him, it was a bit too far in one direction. So he started talking about going back to being bigger, trying things, not being literal. You don't have to be literal. He talked about doing a drunk exercise where he was, instead of acting drunk, he was on a boat. That's not being literal. He talked about doing a drunk exercise where he felt like parts of his body were kind of dying. So you're drunk and my left arm died, for instance. So his translation of the information was not literal. You know what I'm saying? If I had to run out the door, I could imagine whatever was going on. I could put these circumstances, but they weren't literal for him. And he was the first one that started applying that so that your choices aren't exactly what's in the script. So a lot of the information doesn't have to be literal. There was an actor at the Actor Studio who talked about how he did a scene where he was meant to commit suicide, and he couldn't bring himself to sit there and thinking about committing suicide. He just couldn't do it. There are actors that do that. They will sit there, they'll get miserable about, I can't pay my rent today and life isn't great or whatever, and they'll feel suicidal. That's one way to go. There's many others. This guy used to sit there and do whatever the script said. He'd pick up his gun. There's my gun for today. That's imagination. And he'd sit there and he'd do whatever the script said. And the moment he got up to the point where he was meant to pull the trigger, he remembered that he hated cold showers. So as far as he was concerned, he was entering a cold shower and he started to breathe and his body started to get tense. And he'd go like this and he'd go, oh, and he'd about to do it and he'd about to pull the gun and bang. And he had the audience in his fingertips. No one knew what he was working on. It wasn't literal. That came from people like Chekhov and Vakhtangov, which we'll talk about very soon, right? They were imagined circumstances. And you don't reveal those. I tell actors all the time, don't tell people what you're working on. It's no one's business. Because if you let people in your head, it's like the magician showing you the trick. Now they can see it. They can see you're not actually taking a shower, suicidal. They can see the shower. There's people that we do a lot of weird stuff at the lab. Do you know what I'm saying? There's a young girl that was meant to be, raped or something. That was the scene. And all I had to do is, I said, imagine you're walking through gel or jello and slime. And she was just going, oh, and it worked. It's not literal. These two guys were the first ones that came out of that, right? But another thing he talked about, and there is a recording of this. I remember I got a cassette for the younger people of today. There's a thing called a cassette. I recorded a cassette while I was in LA, And it's Michael Chekhov actually talking. You can find it online, I'm quite sure. If you Google it, you'll find it. And he also talked about the atmos, or atmosphere of a character. So I imagine that we're in a fog. And I will talk differently because now we're in a fog. I imagine it's hot. And I would talk like this because I'm in the heat. I imagine that. I imagine it's raining and steamy and sticky and tropical rain. I imagine I'm on the moon. There's exercises people used to do, like you're on the moon stuff. He's one of the early ones that talked about the atmosphere and how that affects the character. But he also talked about the posture of a character. Are they top heavy? Is the center of gravity up here? So you walk around like a Henry VIII or Anthony Quinn, for instance. Or is it bottom heavy, lead foot, so to speak? It's all the way down the bottom. These things are worth exploring. Don't just think. Most actors just think. And I tell them, I think one of the best things Chekhov said about acting, he said many, but one of the best, he said, don't dismiss it till you make it practical. That means you can think, oh, I want to try that exercise. I want to try this. I want to try this. I want to try this. You've already dismissed a bunch of stuff. You don't know what it's like till you get off your butt and physically try it. You have no clue what it's like to walk top heavy. You have no clue what it's like to walk through the rain. You have no clue what it's like to walk like you're in mud. Because a lot of people think they do. And then you become one of these dismissive actors hoping to imagine the right combination of stuff, which will never happen. Get out there, try. I remember the first time, one of the early days I was on a film set, and there's all these famous people I can name drop all day. I want today. That'll come later one day, I'm sure. But I remember going, oh my God, I'm on the set and all these famous people up here. I finally arrived and I was looking for the magic bullet. I was looking in my mind, I was going, forget all this acting shit. Find out what they're doing here. And I remember them going around, mumbling, talking, trying things. And I kept on saying, when's the big magic going to happen? And then they kind of looked at each other and said, great, let's do it. And they did it. And it was amazing. And I went, oh, what an amazing take. And then I remember saying to myself, well, how did they get to that? What was the magic bullet? And I realized there was no magic bullet. For the last 20 or 30 minutes, they were just trying things. They tried things, they failed. They tried things again, they failed. They tried things again, they failed. And then they tried one and they got it right, or a bit more right. That's why you do 50 takes. It's got nothing to do with money. If you do 50 takes and all identical, who gives a shit that you wasted your time? But if you do 50 takes and everyone feeds you something, you can keep going. That's different. There is a story.
Sorry. There is a story.
Someone's got a cough. That's okay. Coughing is part of life, right? There is a story where Al Pacino was working with Brando, and it was when they were doing Godfather. And they talked about one take where they look at each other, and apparently they only did that in one take. It's like two professionals, you know what I'm saying? I got my shit ready, you've got your stuff, we're on the freeway, I trust you're going to stay on that side, I'll stay on my side. And for whatever reason, it worked in that take, and that was it. You don't have to overdo things. If you're prepared and that person's prepared and it works in that moment, why milk it? If you think there's more breathing room, go for it. Do you know what I'm saying? But he is one of the first ones that started to combine all that. And his issue was circumstance is a big one, atmos, and playing the mood. But he did say if you just play the mood, like the mood is sad or comedic or lonely, he also said that mood backwards is doom because you need what's underneath it. These external things help. And they're just tools for an actor, right? Then there's another guy named Vakhtangov, and this is him. That's, this guy here. Looks a little party animal. Look at those eyes. I don't know what he's up to, but there you go. Pass it all around. He was really, and same as, I've got him right here. He was really in the absurd. He did all this stuff that we talk about, you know what I'm saying? The circus kind of stuff, comedy dell'arte and all that, the over-the-top grand stuff. And he wanted to include the audience. He was all about get out there, bring the audience to you. Don't just think normal life, heighten it, be bigger, be absurd. And that's where that came from, right? So basically, Vakhtangov, Chekhov added imagination to the Stanislavski system. Now, here's the interesting thing about these guys. Even though they all came under Stanislavski, they were students of his, they actually worked together, which, sad to say, but is missing in a lot of the film industry today. It's true. We work against each other. They actually work together. They did what's called creative arguing. A lot of great directors and filmmakers do that. You don't just turn up and say, well, I think this and you think this, and we battle it out. We say, let's see. Let's look for the truth in the story. And even though those guys kind of dismissed and smashed Stanislavski's system, he allowed them to do that because he remembered in the early days that he also smashed the systems of the time, but then they found their own voices and they combined them together, right? After them, there's a guy named Meyerhold, and this is him. That's him. And he studied for 4 years at the theater with Stanislavski, and he came up with a thing called constructionism, right? Many people use this, and I'll give you an example. He had what we call a suggestion of realism. You have a stick on stage. It could be a bridge. It could also be a pole the next day. It could also be a boat. Minimalism on stage. That was him. You know what I'm saying? All right? He bought that minimalism thing where you take one thing and you have different sets from it. A lot of people use that today primarily because of budget. Like a budget. You just put a suggestion. It's a table, a light, you're in a restaurant. Do you know what I'm saying? But he was one of the first ones that we know of that came up with that suggestion. He also looked into masks, and he also was very big on the actor reaching out to the audience. So, at this stage now, at the beginning of the 19th century or 20th century, you've got Stanislavski, you've got Vangtankov, you've got Chekhov, you've got Meyerhold, all gave freedom to the actor. All gave freedom and many different tools. And I tell people, explore all of them. They gave you as an actor to take your work further, to come up with what's needed in that moment. I tell people, you don't have to bring sand to the beach. If something works, if you're working with a person and you have that attraction there, or you feel like buddies, you don't need to work. You don't need to substitute and all that crap. You know what I'm saying? You substitute when needed, right? You don't act happy if you're already happy, right? The point is, all these guys came together and for, like I said, for 1800 years, they were sitting in front of mirrors posing. These guys came up with all these other concepts, and they gave us the basis, the foundation of acting as we're known today, right? From there, all this landed on the shores of America. And I will talk about that a second time, a second podcast. I'll talk about what the different American teachers saw in the system when they met Stanislavski and these people, and what their influences were, and how we connect them today. The big thing I want all the actors out there to understand, as I said at the very beginning, this is very interesting on paper. But on paper, it's like me reading about football and dancing. If I don't actually do it, I'm not a dancer, I'm not a football player. If you read this and don't get up there and do it, you're just this. And also learn all these tools. You'd be amazed how many actors come to me and go, I only do this version, I only do that version. You're a carpenter. Fix my table. I don't give a shit what tool you use. I don't ask. No one asks what tools you use. But if you don't have them in your belt as needed, then you're going to go, oh my God. And what happens is then at that moment you panic, nerves kick in, and you start to push. And I go, no, you need to know every single tool in your belt. So I will see you next time. And we'll talk about how all this lands in America and where we are today.